Hi everybody and welcome to another Lines in Wax discography video. I apologise for taking so long to follow up on my debut video, but I have had an absolute fucking ton of stuff going on. Where has 2021 gone? It is now 2022, that is insane. Anyway, I've now got a few more ducks in line, so I'm hoping to be able to write a few more discography videos than I did last year, which wouldn't be difficult because I did one, as and when time allows, so I'll hopefully get through some more this year. I apologise. Anyway, we'll see. So thanks to anybody who's watching this, who also watched my original Scorn video. I had some great interactions over that video, way better received than I could have imagined. I was expecting like 50 people to watch it. So yeah, thank you so much. I had some awesome comments and stuff, so thank you to everybody who watched that one. Anyway, that's enough about the channel. Let's get into the meat of why I'm making this video, and that is, of course, as the title states, to talk about legendary British extreme metal outfit Cradle of Filth. Cradle of Filth have to be one of the most divisive, love 'em or hate 'em Marmite bands of all time. You're either head over heels in love with the meandering metal madness or foaming at the mouth over the high-pitched shrieks of vocalist and bandleader Daniel Davey, more commonly known, of course, as Danny Filth. Danny is perhaps quite famously the only member of the band who's lasted since their inception in 1991, and the band has had a notorious revolving door of a lineup, which is something of an understatement. Something, again, that lineup has solidified somewhat in recent years, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just say I won't be going into the full ins and outs of Cradle's entire lineup. I honestly don't even know everybody who's played in this band over the years, despite them being my favourite band for a while when I was a teenager. Their lineup changes, especially in the 90s, towards the end of the 90s, and fucking mind-boggling. There's been so many people who played in Cradle of Filth over the years that they have their own standalone Wikipedia article, which just says it all, really. So let's just say I'll touch on some key contributor, as and when, whilst we're going through the list, and I guess we'll leave it at that. So, anyway, Cradle of Filth. They were formed in Suffolk, in lovely old England, all the way back in 1991. Contrary to the belief of many metalheads who perhaps assume that Cradle has black metal roots, the band actually formed as a death metal act and dropped 3 cassette demos by the end of 1992. These were entitled Invoking the Unclean, Orgiastic Pleasures Foul, what a name, and Total Fucking Darkness. And whilst I won't include demos in the full discography review, it's worth mentioning these recordings purely because the 3 of them together more or less make up an album in length, kind of, and they showcase a murky beginning to a band that not many people know about. So, I mean, I guess if you're not a fan of Cradle, then there's no reason to go back. But yeah, if you like fathomless, muddy death metal with a weird sprinkling of keyboards, by all means, check out these demos. A lot of this shit, though, again, was remastered and re-released in 2014 as the Total Fucking Darkness remaster. Just so you know, that's out there. You can check that out too. On that note, I will be just dropping a quick explanation here into what actually counts in the discography series before I start properly. And I will also be what I'll be including going forward chronologically. Of course, the focus in is going to be studio albums, right? Obviously. But with most YouTube channels who do this kind of thing, they kind of exclude the EP format. And I've instead chosen to include EPs, as watchers of the Scorn video will know. So for the sake of Cradle of Filth's long and meandering discography, however, I will not be counting live albums, best of, compilations, remasters, or any various re-releases of some of the records I've had over the last 30 years, although there is 1 or 2 exceptions there. Although some of these things will obviously get a mention along the way in the order of things. Anyway, let's get stuck in, because no doubt this is going to be a long one. In 1992... Cradle of Filth burst onto the underground scene with Goetia. Or at least, they would have. Unbelievably, Cradle of Filth's first full-length album was deleted entirely from existence. Yes, After a couple of demos, Cradle initially signed with Tombstone Records to release their album Goetia. Is that how you say Goetia? Is that right? I hope it's fucking right, because I'm going to look like a twat. Like when I kept saying Vase Solis in the Scorn video, even though I think it's Vase Solis. Doesn't fucking matter. I'm an idiot. No one cares. However, in a bizarre twist of fate, Tombstone Records kind of went bankrupt or something, and they folded. Whatever happened, they were unable to pay the recording studio for the Goetia master tapes. This left the band right the way up shit creek without a paddle, as similarly, Danny and Cradle at the time were in no position financially to buy the master tapes of their freshly recorded album off the studio. And so it was fucking deleted, just like that. Boom, gone. As gutted as the band must have been at the time, Danny has since explained that this was all probably for the best. If the album was saved, Cradle would have been contractually tied to Tombstone Records for 7 albums, and with the label's money troubles, it was definitely for the best that the two entities parted, as no doubt Tombstone would have eventually dragged Cradle down with them before their career had even truly begun. But what a cost of freedom! The scrapping of your entire debut album. Therefore, it wasn't until 1994 and probably 19,000 different lineups later that Cradle of Filth finally came back with a full-length debut album. The Principle of Evil Made Flesh. Is there a cooler or more awesome name for an album? The answer, my friends, is no. The album shat out into the world in 1994 on the fledgling Cacophonous Records. There was a banging lineup for Cradle at this time. So this is what I would consider, at least, the classic Cradle lineup, or the proto-classic Cradle lineup, because technically, we'll get into the classic lineup a little bit later on. We had Robin Graves on bass. He was a mainstay from this point onwards. Nick Barker, the one, the only Nicholas Barker, the guy who's played on a bazillion albums that are just absolutely outstanding. I'll talk about Nick Barker's drumming a little bit later on. Paul Allender on guitar, Paul Ryan on guitar, Ben Ryan, I think they were brothers, on keyboards, and of course Danny on vocals. That was the main core of the band anyway. They had some session musicians as well. The Principle of Evil Made Flesh is, simply put, one of my favourite albums of all time. Of course, I didn't start with this as a teenager. I wasn't cult enough. I got into Cradle for Bittersweets and Damnation And A and all that kind of stuff. I eventually worked my way backwards, where Principle and Vempire became my favourite works of gothic horror. A lot of people say that The Principle of Evil Made Flesh is where Cradle of Filth came closest to being a black metal band. I have to disagree, because despite the massive gothic overtones and the corpse paint and the hammy keyboards, and I think they toured with Emperor around this time, and, I get the association, but Cradle's metal, as it were, that meat that's behind all the pomp, has always been based in more death metal riffage, just like the demos before it. And, they would go on to do, more traditional heavy metal harmonies, stepped up to 11. There was, Iron Maiden dripping in black gloss and steroid sweat. But nowhere is this death metal underlayer more prominent, demo tapes aside, than Principle of Evil Made Flesh, with its dirty, drab, and slightly rougher on the edges production. A lot of the time, the record reminds me of Serenade's era Anathema. Not a coincidence then, really, that Anathema vocalist at the time, Darren White, appears on guest vocals for the song A Dream of Wolves in the Snow. So from the tone of the Death Doom of the guitars to the almost identical drum production on both albums, it's also worth noting as well that Nick Barker's drumming pace, if you're familiar with Nick Barker and his drums, he's a fucking absolutely amazing drummer who's drummed with some amazing bands, Lockup, Dimmu Borgir. I could keep going, but he's much slower here than usual, and that's really saying something. Maybe not so much to meet the pace of the songs, but maybe it's more to do with his youth and developing drum skills. His performance here is the only one I've ever been able to personally keep up with, and his flourishes, fills, and cymbal usage and variation taught me so much as an aspiring drummer. Anyway, I'm fucking rambling as always. So Principle of Evil is bare bones Cradle, but contains some absolute belters. So the Black Goddess Rises, to Eve, the Art of Witchcraft, of Mist and Midnight Skies. This is probably one of my favourite Cradle of Filth songs. Some Are Dying Fast. I could go on and on and on. Easily one of the best metal albums of all time, in my humble opinion. Just before we move on, I just want to quickly talk about the art for The Principle of Evil Made Flesh. I think it was, is it Nigel Wingrove? I've just pulled that name out of my arse. I don't know. But yeah, just look at that thing. It's got to be one of the best Cradle of Filth album covers. They got a lot of albums, a lot of different vibes going on over the years, but this has got to be one of the best. What is going on? It's covered in blood. It's quite erotic, kind of. It's so fucking strange. Like there's lilies around her head, and it's just like, is that a veil? Like a wedding veil? Crazy. And that kind of looks like Emma Watson, and it's just like, what is going on? Really strange. Love it. Absolutely mental. I wanted to get it tattooed, but I've got a lot of shit tattoos. I don't think that would have been a good idea for a tattoo. But yeah, amazing. Absolutely amazing artwork. Just as a quick side note here, before we move on to the next record, one of the musicians who performed on the album, the session vocalist here, Andrea Mayer, also of Aghast and I think is Nebel Hex fame. Well, she was one of the victims of the recent terror attacks in Kongsberg in Norway in October 2021. I just want to take a quick moment to mention her, as this is a long and meandering video, and as like I said, I'm not going to catch everybody who's been involved in Cradle. So, of course, I just want to say, rest in peace. You know, no one deserves to be shot with a fucking bow and arrow in 2021 or whatever. Jesus, it's insane. So rest in peace, Andrea Mayer.
Like strings to be pulled and cut, I will make my puppets dance. The men will bow down before me to take my flesh as submissive thoughts of dark unbridled love. I know these things and more, 'cause I await you. Nemesis that restrained the current of life and the bride of evil itself.
So, yeah, with Principle of Evil Made Flesh, Cradle had their debut out the gate and quickly followed up in 1995 with the legendary Dusk and Her Embrace. Actually, for the second time in so many short years, disaster struck at the Cradle camp. The band's relationship with Cacophonous Records turned to shit, with, according to Wikipedia, the band accusing the label of contractual and financial mismanagement. The year of 1995 got chewed up entirely by ongoing legal proceedings, and much like what originally happened to the band's debut album, this sophomore effort for Cacophonous, Dusk and Her Embrace, got shelved and was never released. Well, at least not for another 21 years, but we'll get to that later. With the second album, it wasn't deleted like the first album, but the band had still lost 2 whole entire albums. You know, what? That's just nuts. That's bonkers. You know, like, what are the chances of that happening? Like, I can't even begin to imagine, as a musician myself, I can't imagine what that would feel like. However, just like kind of when you kick a Rottweiler over and over, instead of killing it, you're just going to make it really fucking angry. It's kind of what happened here with Cradle of Filth from this point. Or mini-album, Vempire, or Dark Fairy Tales in Palestine, what a title, was recorded to break all contractual obligations with Cacophonous Records and free the band to release music on other record labels. In a bizarre twist in the Cradle story yet again, and how they're just like completely unlike any other band, it's like, who shits out a half-assed, not even an album, EP mini-album, to break a contract with a record label and then ends up making the best record of their entire career? Vempire is absolutely my favourite Cradle of Filth recording by a country mile, or like by that mile of road that connects Nosferatu's castle to that little village. It's a really long road. You cannot beat the atmosphere, the songwriting, and the musical dexterity on display by this young incarnation of the band. The lineup has changed a bit from the Principal days. Like I said, that was the proto-classic lineup, and now this is, personally, for me, the classic lineup. Paul Allender left, Soz Paul, bye-bye, to be replaced by Stuart Anstis. Also, revolving door of different guitarists, all played with the band under the identity of Jared Demeter. There was a running gag through the 90s, and I'm unclear who the second guitarist on this record actually was, because it's credited to the fictional Jared, I think, like I said in the booklet, but there's no information that I can see on the internet, just at a quick glance. Damien Gregory took over the keyboardist role, meaning that both the Ryan brothers were now at the band as well. So, ta-ta for now, Ryan brothers. As much as I love Vempire, things don't exactly get off to a flying start with this 6-track monster. Open at Ebony Dressed for Sunset, whilst having one of the best song names ever, is a garbled mush of noise. And The Great Forest Whispers My Name worked better in its original recording format on the previous album, Principle of Evil Made Flesh. But when Queen of Winter Throned kicks off after a spooky fucking, Dracula quote or something, you know shit is about to go down. Queen of Winter Throned remains my favourite Cradle of Filth song of all time, and is one of my favourite songs of all time of any artist in any genre, period. A 10-minute long catastrophe that blasts, crawls and shrieks through a gamut of epic proportions. The last few minutes alone, when it's going through like the verse, chorus, middle break, and then boom, the last 4 minutes comes back into this incredibly grandiose conclusion, which is just Nocturnal Supremacy follows a slightly thrashier affair with less scope but more brutality. She mourns a lengthening shadow, offers a respite, is a not long spooky keyboard piece before the closing epic track, The Rape and Ruin of Angels, takes us on an 8-minute journey through the windows of heaven and hell, of salvation and damnation. And breathe. Cradle of Filth were on fire in 1996, dropping a new re-recorded version of their lost album Dusk And Her Embrace in the same year as Vempire. This time the band had signed with legendary and long-running heavy metal label Music for Nations, and this began a fruitful relationship that would last until the early 2000s. Line-up-wise, it's worth mentioning at this point the inputs of the fantastic Sarah Jezebel Deva, who would stay with the band for many, many years as the lead female vocalist. Her eventual split from Cradle seems to have left a lot of animosity, but let's try and focus on her epic and timeless vocal contributions, Dusk And Her Embrace being one of the absolute best. Speaking of vocals, Danny's voice is absolutely out of this world here. Like, when Vempire saw him shrieking at inhuman pitches or growling with a lowered pitch shifter, Dusk instead covers the entire gamut of the man's ability. Truly, his vocals are one of the most special parts of the band, to put it lightly, and nowhere is that better displayed than here, a foil to Sarah Jezebel Davis' softer tones.
Worship me with crimson sacrifice. So my countenance twitch
where do I begin? I mean, Dusk is probably the benchmark for measuring all Cradle albums going forward from this point, and whilst, yes, there are some issues with the production, these aren't anywhere near as glaring as those which played the follow-up record, and if anything, these gremlins add somehow to the atmospheric whole rather than detract from the experience at all. If I was to make one gripe about the production, it's sometimes that Nick Barker's drums are almost totally drowned out by all the other elements of play, which is a real shame. So the leap the band made between Principle of Evil Mid-Flesh and Vempire was astounding in its own right, so hearing that maturity form further again through the gorgeous meandering menaces, I'm going to say meandering a lot when talking about this band, on the record is an absolute pleasure. The guitars as much as weep out of the speakers, and the keyboard work is some of the best yet. In cases of extreme music and keyboards, it can kind of feel sometimes like the two sit apart on the recording or awkwardly alongside each other. But here the keys only seem to enrapture the entire composition, as if some ethereal, ghostly blanket of goodness is wrapping itself around all of the songs. Oh, and Funeral in Carpathia is one of the best songs ever written, just saying. So does Dusk and Her Embrace deserve a remaster? Perhaps not, but it would be interesting to hear it with the elements slightly clarified, particularly the drums. If you thought Dusk was a classic, its follow-up record, Cruelty and the Beast, propelled the band to new heights and had them lauded with much more critical acclaim, despite the nasty beast of bad production biting them in the arse once again on this album. Cruelty saw the death metal elements of Cradle more or less completely fall away, a riff or two excluded, and they fully embrace their destiny as weavers of pompous, gratuitous gothic nightmares. Remember when I said something about Iron Maiden being on goth steroids dialed up to 11? Yeah, that's what this album sounds like, with its beautiful melodic riffs and galloping sections. Lineup-wise, it's worth noting the onboarding of Lecter Smith on keyboards, replacing Damian Gregory, and Gian Paez, Gian on guitar. So, yeah, there's just a few changes there in the lineup. Cruelty saw Cradle yet again build and mould their barbed lullabies of maturing gothic romance. If you've loved what came before, then of course there is no need to stop here. 13 Autumns and a Widow, Cruelty brought the Orchids, Beneath the Howling Stars, Bathory Aria, Twisted Nails of Faith, all enormous, career best filth numbers that tick all of the right boxes. The production, however, is thin and brittle, which is fine, especially in such realms of frost-crusted, fragile, blackened romps such as these. However, I would absolutely love to know who signed off on those drums. I hope they got fucking sacked. Nick Barker's immensely complex playing is reduced to a series of clicks and clatters. In the grand scheme of the atmosphere, it almost works, like it did on Dusk, but I have a nagging feeling that some producers in the 90s just didn't know what to do with that level of drumming, especially alongside the rest of the many moving pieces of Cradle of Filth and what they had going on all at the same time. It's quite a cacophony, isn't it? But yeah, they did my boy Nick dirty with that drum sound. Click, 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 click. Oh boy. So I only intended to use that terrible record skip sound effect once when talking about Goetia getting shit canned, but damn if it's not applicable to the many twists and turns of Cradle of Filth. So the years following Cruelty saw something of an exodus from Cradle of Filth, and in a period of wild instability followed. This also saw the first kind of seismic shift in the band's sound, which had, to this point, lineup changes and all, seemed to flow organically from its dusty death metal roots right through to the, beautiful conclusion, I guess, with Cruelty and the Beast. You can track the progress logically. You can connect the dots from A to B to C, blah, 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 blah. But after about 470,000 lineup changes in the late 90s, Cradle entered into what seemed to be a period of, instability. Whether things were okay on the inside of Camp Cradle, I couldn't possibly comment, but from the outside, things seem like a colossal mess at this point. As did this little EP that was released in the interim. A mixed bag of decisions, clearly, and even different lineups per song. What is this, Napalm Death scum? Resulting in a bizarre cross-section of tracks, which was just comes off with bad vibes. From the Cradle to Enslave isn't exactly bad, but it is all over the fucking place. At this point, the band is in a serious state of flux, shedding members like a snake with alopecia. I think there's like 1,500 different drummers on this EP. It's a bit of an odds and ends collection, to be honest with you, but every track is a corker, except maybe Pervert's Church, which is a remix tune, and it's just shite. There's cover songs here, and they're worth the price of admission alone. Their cover of Misfits, Death Come Rippin', is just that. A fucking rippin' bat. And it's also a banging cover of Anathema's Sleepless. Which is also pretty incredible. And there we go. There comes that link again, once again, to Anathema's Serenades, where Sleepless originally appeared, even though the band have a few versions of it now. Again, Anathema's Sleepless is probably one of the best songs of all time. I would love to do an Anathema discography series, but there's a few in the middle which I haven't heard, like the more proggy stuff. I digress. I know the two bands have been quite close over the years, and the cover of Sleepless by Cradle of Filth is clearly a testament of their love. At this point, you had Martin Powell in the band on keyboards, at least on this half of this EP, and I'm pretty sure he's played with Anathema. In fact, I seen Anathema just before 2010, I think, and I'm almost certain Martin Powell was playing keyboards for them. Anyway, the last good thing with the Cradle to Enslave EP is if you turn the CD sleeve inside out, you get a much better cover, and that's really all I have to say on that. Depending on who you speak to, Cradle of Filth either died with Midian, or it's one of the greatest records the band ever did. I fall somewhere firmly into the latter camp. Midian was a standout in the gothic craziest, and was the earlier Cradle of Filth days. I remember reading a review online, which must have been done by a very serious, very cult black metal fan, who said that Midian was pure trash and was nothing more but pop music with distorted guitars. I don't know how much True Novum crack that fucking idiot had been smoking, and yes, Midian is different to the albums before it. A style change that I've already mentioned was marked on the Cradle to Enslave EP, but it's still a, wait for that word again, meandering, pompous clusterfuck of an album, which is just what you want from Cradle of Filth, right? My one criticism, once again, is the production. It's really treble heavy this time, almost like compensating for the hollowness of the previous two records. The drums, they sound fake as fuck, even more so than the usual metal triggering, perhaps as a side effect of this odd, unnaturally dense production choice. I don't know. Either way, we can welcome on board a new drummer. I can't remember if he appeared on Cradle to Enslave EP or if his big his big debut record was Midian. And That is Adrian Erlandson of At the Gates fame. Adrian would remain for quite a while with the band, and his sound would become integral with this era of Cradle of Filth's output. The guitar work here is shared between Guy Pyers and Paul Allender, who returned. Remember Paul from Principle of Evil Made Flesh? Hi Paul, how's it going, mate? Anyway, the dual guitar work between these two is nothing short of mesmerising, as of course is Danny's bizarre lyrical musings, which range from the outright filth, no pun intended, check out Lord Abortion, to fragile verses of gothic poetry. Top all that off with Sarah Jezebel Davis' excited operatic vocals and Martin Fowler's mysterious keyboard work, and Midian is truly a winner if you take it warts and all. I could sit here now finishing off by recommending pretty much every track on the album, but Midian is probably best taken as a whole. Where the full journey, not to mention the epic nature of the closing tracks, can be fully appreciated. Another side note, this is where the band first started their famous collaborations with the one and only Doug Bradley, yes, Pinhead, who lent his notorious voice to a number of songs here, the most well-known, of course, being her Ghost in the Fog. Even though I just said I'm not going to recommend any standout tracks, fuck it, I'm going to recommend. If you've never heard Cradle of Filth before, her Ghost in the Fog is probably the best place where you could start. Fuck the single version, even though it's got a pretty cool, spooky video. If you discount Sarah Jezebel's decapitated head floating around the screen, like, what the fuck was that? Break out the full-length album version, get the lyrics open, and follow along as you listen. Honestly, the song is beautifully written and truly highlights Daniel Davies' literary chops. Honestly, it's a cry and shame this bloke has never written a novel or anything like that. He clearly is very talented when it comes to writing. His lyrics are basically pure poetry. His prose is instantly recognisable, and Cradle's songs come alive before your eyes if you follow along with the lyrics. That sounds a bit poncy, but it's fucking true. When I was a kid, I used to sit for hours listening to Cradle of Filth albums from start to finish, following the lyrics in the booklet and looking at all the mental shit that they used to print in the CD booklets. Good times, man. Anyway, moving on. Bittersweet to Succubi is a strange stopgap EP / mini album. I guess it's an album. It's fucking like 10 tracks long. It came between the release of Midian and the band's epic Damnation And A. So I'm not entirely sure of the reasons why they decided to release this as it is. But I expect it was something to, just to keep the fans happy and busy when the band were no doubt in the long negotiating phase of being signed to Sony Records. I loved Bittersweet as a teenager. As an adult, I can appreciate the muddled mess that the record truly is. For starters, the production has a strange hollowness to it. I don't know what it is. Why, despite the classic nature of the early Cradle stuff, and now we kind of get into mid-Cradle stuff, but why can't they ever get the fucking production right? Literally. Anyway, it's an interesting choice. It's really hollow. It's odd for a band as complex in sound as Cradle to have that, like, the middle kind of pumped all the way up and the bass and the treble kind of sucked down. It's bizarre. Secondly, there are a slew of re-recorded classics here, which I can only imagine has something to do with Paul Allender returning to the band, because they've got all songs off Principle of Evil Made Flesh redone. On that note, why is The Black Goddess Rises given a new title of The Black Goddess Rises 2 Ebon Nemesis, while the other old tracks which are here aren't given new titles, not even a Sorry 2 at the end for their trouble? They're all complete reworkings of the original, so why rename one of them and not the others? That puzzles the living fuck out of me. As for the new tracks on offer here, they seem a little bit unsteady and almost unfinished. It's like listening to a demo, almost. I mean, it's not that they're particularly bad, but instead of just rough around the edges, I guess. There are some diamonds here, though, like Suicide and Other Comforts, All Hope in Eclipse, which is the opening track, or the closing track, Scorched Earth Erotica. Suicide and Other Comforts, in particular, is another one of my all-time favourite Cradle of Filth tracks, and Danny's vocals towards the end are absolutely insane. But yeah, all in all, bit of a mixed bag to Succubi. Succubi! Ah, yes, the major label debut. We're not talking major. We're talking major. Like Sony fucking Records, Epic, all that shit. Boom. Cradle are up there now with like fucking Gareth Gates and shit. Yeah, so, the band ended their contract, I think, amicably or fairly amicably at least, with Music for Nations, and they signed to Sony Records for Damnation And A, an enormously, what's the word? Big undertaking, massive undertaking. It includes a whole orchestra, a whole real orchestra. I think it's Hungary. Is it Hungary's orchestra? Please, I want that to be right, so I don't have to be corrected in the comments. Anyway, what is considered by many to be a missed step, despite the effort, despite the grandiose skill, it is considered to be a missed step by many Cradle fans, is actually one of my favourite releases from them. As I said with Midian, depending on how old school the Cradle fan you're talking to is, Cradle either died with Midian, Damnation, or Nymphetamine. Now, I can see arguments for all of the above because of the stylistic changes which developed at this time, especially when you compare and contrast the original style and vision of the band, but all of the above are great albums in their own right, yes, including Nymphetamine, Fight Me, we'll get to that in a minute. Damnation And A is gorgeously ambitious. It's not as intricately woven and spookily, authentically gothic as, say, of course, Dusk And Her Embrace or Cruelty And The Beast, but Damnation has its eyes on the bigger picture, the long game, as it were. And it's a fucking long album. It's like 70-odd minutes. Like Metallica called, they want their runtime back. I don't think it's possible for a band of this style with this budget and with a 1 CD time limit to make anything more epic than this. Boasting full orchestration and Sony's big budget studio production, Damnation In A sounds 1,000 times better than both previous albums combined. Production is fucking finally on point. Thank you. The album is split into several parts containing 3 songs apiece, and then they're like kind of split out with these huge orchestral pieces. They're separated by intermissions and narration provided by a very evil sounding Welshman, not me. Honestly, there isn't really a bad song on this album. Sure, some of them do not necessarily need to be as long as they are, but the strongest parts for me are the opening 3 tracks and the closing 3 tracks. The closing 3 tracks, Manticore, Thank God for the Suffering, and The Smoke of Her Burning are some of the greatest Cradle material of all time, specifically The Smoke of Her Burning. And even if you hate this album, or you really didn't gel with it when it came out, or whatever, if you've never given it a track, never given any of these tracks a try The Smoke of Her Burning. I implore you, it's a fucking hell of a song. This is also the album that gave us the Babylon AD single, and the song Serpent Tongue as well, so let's not be too quick to shit all over this, no matter how terrible that CGI album art actually is. I forgot to mention, for the Damnation And A era, we no longer have Robin Graves on bass. We now have Dave Pybus. Dave Pybus? Is that how you say? What is with these names? How do you say that? I hope it's Pybus. Dave Pybus. Sorry, Dave, if that's wrong. I apologise from the bottom of my blackened heart. Dave Pybus, now on bass. Gian Pires has also left the group, leaving Paul Allender as the sole guitar player. That pretty much carries over into Nymphetamine. Even though the guys had a few different guitarists at this point on the album, at least, is Paul Allender playing guitars. Maybe a bit of guitar contributions from Martin Fowle. Not sure. But yeah, now we're up on Nymphetamine, the 2004 release on Roadrunner Records. It's a double-edged sword for me, this one. I remember tuning into Scuzz TV at the time and being enormously disappointed at the title track. I was on MSN Messenger, right? MSN Messenger. My mate Ross, he's like, go downstairs, get in your living room, turn on Scuzz TV, turn on Sky, go on Scuzz TV, the new Cradle track is playing. That turned out to be an Nymphetamine fix. And honestly, I found the whole thing quite disappointing. It wasn't extreme metal in any way, shape, or form. As a 14-year-old metalhead, I loudly proclaimed that I was done with Cradle of Filth at this point. They had sold out and all the rest of it. But then they dropped Gilded Cunt as a download off the Roadrunner website, and I promptly ate my words. The track remains one of the heaviest and most savage songs that the band have ever penned. Nymphetamine as an album begins... As good as this is, it begins a downward trend in Cradle's output for me. As a standalone album, it strays more into traditional melodic metal territory. Think Melodeath with keyboards and Danny Filth, and you're along the right path. I am, however, not doing this album justice. It is still a solid metal record. It's just not the same level of craziness or as complexity or as gothic meandering madness that I would have come to expect from Cradle of Filth. The reality, however, is not really a bad song here despite that. Even in its full 9-minute original form, Nymphetamine Overdose, as it's called, is a stunning metal track when the whole thing's included. It's also worth mentioning at this point, there was an Nymphetamine special edition. They had the lass from Leaves' Eyes singing on Nymphetamine Fix. But on the special edition of Nymphetamine, not only do you get a bunch of bizarre cover tracks, you also get the Nymphetamine Sarah Jezebel Deva fix. And this is Nymphetamine with Sarah singing on it. Why they just didn't do this to begin with, I will never know. This version of Nymphetamine, squirreled away on a bonus disc, on a version of the album that maybe not that many people have, is by far the fucking best version of this song. There's 3 versions of this fucking song now, and that is by far the best. Why, oh why, oh why they didn't just use the operatic vocalist that they already had in the band for this song. The fact that she isn't on... I don't want to stand for, or whatever the word is for... I'm not Camp Jezebel Deva. I've not got a grudge to bear here, but why the fuck wasn't she on the single version? It makes no sense. Why bring someone in externally when you've got that talent right there in your band? It makes zero fucking sense to me. But if you want to check out, or you've never heard it, obviously you might have heard Nymphetamine because it's a pretty popular track, but if you want to just check out that version. And then we're going to move on to something which is a little bit shit. So, Thornography. I consider Thornography to be one of the lowest points in the entire Cradle discography. Again, it was released in Roadrunner, this time in 2006. Thornography, what is that name? Could happily be considered the sister release to its predecessor, Nymphetamine. It was also the last album to feature Adrian Alanson on drums. By now, it is also, unfortunately, nowhere near as good as Nymphetamine ever was, even though that was a bit shaky. Don't get me wrong, there are some great songs here, if we're going song by song, but it's just as a Cradle of Filth studio album, it lacks in several of the departments in which they usually excel. Speed, intricacy, epic fuck-off tracks. Granted, not every track has to be this way, and there has been something of a thawing of the material, especially comparing Nymphetamine to, say, Vempire, for example, but Thornography seems to be a one-trick pony. It seems to be, dare I say it seems to almost be a commercial cash grab with nothing particularly exciting or adventurous going on at any point throughout the album. There's clean singing. You got Veal Velo from him guesting on a track. They even brought this up on Coronation Street. If this album is being quoted on Coronation Street, the patron saint of heartache.
Sounds familiar. I went through something similar a few years back. Patron saint of heartache. That's me. There's a lyric. I'm not being pretentious.
James Hedger plays on this. James came in on guitars. He plays in fucking Mayhem. The guy plays in Mayhem, one of the greatest fucking bands of all time. The riffs he does are insane. Why? This album is so shit. Why is he wasting his time on this record? I have no fucking idea what was going on with the band at this point, but this is an absolute turd. Like, what the fuck was going on? Like, another thing, you've got... one track I think has blast beats on it. I don't want to be like, yeah, if it's not got blast beats on it, man, then I don't want to fucking know. But like, this is a Cradle of Filth record we're talking about here. Only one song has blast beats in it. Like, where is the metal, folks? Where is the extreme metal? It is missing. And then the fucking whole thing finishes with a cover of Heaven 17's Temptation featuring Dirty Harry. Remember Harry from the early 2000s? Well, now she's back as Dirty Harry in the mid 2000s on this steaming pile of shit. This track sounds like a fucking sore thumb. You've got like, towards the end, you've actually got some good songs. You've got Rise of the Pentagram, which got your boy Pinhead back in there. You've got a nice instrumental. Then you've got Under Hunter Spoon, which is like a nice mid-paced gothic crawler. And then boom, you got fucking Temptation. Like, what a terrible cover. What a fucking dreadful idea. This album is shit. I'm sorry. It is just not very good at all. There are some good songs. I Am the Thorn, probably the only one I can really think of at the top of my head. Dirge Inferno. I'm going to stop because I'm just going to pick holes in this. Let's move on to the next record that Cradle of Filth would release. There would be some more big changes, some more lineup changes, and then we get this. Godspeed on the Devil's Thunder, the life and crimes of Gil de Rais. What a fucking U-turn. What a shot in the arm. Revitalized a bit with, a new lineup, specifically a new drummer, Martin Skorupka. I apologize, mate, if I've said that wrong. I cannot pronounce your surname. This guy on drums is a fucking powerhouse. He is easily fucking gotta be one of the main reasons why Cradle sounds so alive again at this point in their career. He kicks the fuck out of this band. The pace is back. This guy is an absolute animal behind the kit, but like not in like a Mick Harris kind of way, more than like a really precise, absolute 10 out of 10 metal drummer. What an addition to the band. Charles Hedger sticks around as well, like a dude from Mayhem. Much better album. Guy is not wasted here. This guy is playing alongside Paul Allender and really kicking it with the riffs on this thing. Rosie Smith is credited as the keyboard player here. I always thought Rosie was just a live keyboardist for the band, but she's credited as keyboards on this thing. So cool. We've also got Dave Pybus hanging around on bass, just giving you an idea of what's going on. Originally, the guy who was supposed to do narration on this wasn't actually supposed to be Doug Bradley. I can't remember who it was supposed to be, but he found the story of Gil de Rais so fucked up that he more or less refused to do the narration and left the studio where he was doing his voiceovers, and they had to bring Doug Bradley to come in because Doug Bradley's absolutely fine with talking about all the horrible shit. So, yeah, why fucking fix what isn't broken? Doug Bradley and Cradle of Filth go together like a cigarette and a pint of lager. So, Godspeed on the Devil's Thunder definitely felt like something of a return to form after the super commercialized blast beat free fest of Thornography. Like I said, Martin's injecting a fucking powerhouse jolt of new life into Cradle of Filth's arguably lackluster attempt at mainstream music. So returning then back to the fray from that commercial attempt with a concept album about a French satanic pedo was just what Cradle needed to do. Sacre bleu. There's some fucking amazing songs on this, as you would probably expect. The single Death of Love is a bit long, doesn't need to be 7 minutes long, but it's a fucking good song. Shot Out of Hell, The 13th Caesar, Sweetest Maleficia. Anti Unsolver, 10 Leagues Beneath Contempt, Godspeed on the Devil's Flower, Thunder. Amazing, absolutely amazing album. The CGI artwork's a bit what, but it's a fucking great return to form. And on the trajectory that Cradle were on, the drop in this was just so unexpected. It really revitalized my interest in Cradle of Filth at this point. And just like that, after that unexpected return to form, Cradle step off a cliff again into the abyss of fucking mediocrity with Darkly Venus. I can't even remember the name of the fucking album. Darkly Venus Aversa in 2010. No sign to Peaceful and their own label Abracadabra. Who I think they did. They did Bittersweets to Succubi under Abracadabra as well. But Abracadabra is Cradle's own label. They also released this on Peaceful, slowly making their way through every fucking extreme metal label that there is. Look at that album cover. It looks terrible. It looks like some goth kid on DeviantArt fucking pulled that together. That is just not good. I'm sorry. And it kind of gives you the gist of what the album is. You've got Martin again just kicking the fuck out of the drums. The pace is a lot faster. There's some good songs here, Mistress from the Sucking Pit, but as a whole, man, this is so disappointing. Darkly, it's a hideously titled later effort from Cradle of Filth. In what I refer to the Devil's Thunder aside, the post-Thornography lull. Darkly is just that. Dark, almost artificially so, with like that fake kind of goth sense to things. Cradle's sense of mystery and evil is something that permeates most of its musical output over the years. However, here on Darkly, the atmosphere is just gone. It's forced, it's cheesy, and it's just a little crap, to be honest with you. I mean, musically, the band are obviously still tight. They're still proficiently sound. There's no complaints with the performances here. Just as a whole, the finished product just feels like that. A product. And Darkly Venus Aversa is a swing and a miss for me. So, I mean, I don't want to get stuck down, drab, dark, talking shit about this band. That's not what this video is about, but I have to confront now what is, in my opinion, the worst Cradle record. This is the end of that downward trajectory, thankfully. The band, at this point, when Manticore and How the Other Horrors comes along, I mean, look at that art. Look at the title of this thing. It's like the Manticore plus whatever. They can't be fucked to even finish the fucking album title. The band was reduced to a 3-piece at this point, and we're more or less listening to the Paul Allender show. Cynically, I could suggest that Manticore, let's not forget its various other horrors. It's like listening to Thornography Part 2, but I think that would be an insult even to Thornography. So make of that album what you will, at least, right? I just ripped the fuck out of that, but at least it was catchy and poppy in parts. Manticore is unfortunately the most boring and uninteresting thing that Cradle have ever done, and it pains me to say this. I don't want to rip in on my favourite bands, but surely everything's here, but never before or after this point has everything felt so mechanical and lifeless and boring and dull. Manticore is Cradle of Filth by the numbers, by the book, with riffs harking back, arguably, to their second worst record, Thornography, as I said, but without any of the actual charm, if anything, that album did have in its cash grab attempt to be a mainstream band. Across the board, though, Manticore was a project is a failure. I guess it's trying to strip down and go back to basics and just play some heavy fucking metal. But despite the talent involved, I can't help but compare this to the album that followed it, which was just fucking incredible, and we'll get to that in a minute. But Manticore was a completely unnecessary release from a band that was on its knees. This is like the Cradle to Enslave of this era of Cradle of Filth. But it didn't stick the landing. Luckily then they, or Danny and Martin, went on to, recruit a bunch of new bloods and bounced back once again. And have been going strong more or less since. Long live Cradle. Please, long live Cradle. But this era of the band was just not good. Thankfully, however, the clouds are about to lift and there's some lovely sunshine on the way. So like I said, Hammer of the Witches thankfully ended a pretty shit fucking period of time for Cradle of Filth. Not only did they release a ton of fucking, just pretty mediocre albums, they also released like some really fucking crap kind of just stuff going alongside it, like Evermore Darkly, which was like stuff is just chock full of fucking songs that were like leftovers from Darkly Venus Aversa, and then Midnight in the Labyrinth, which was basically like full orchestrated versions of the band's songs. So like a lot of the classic Cradle is just keyboard and orchestra only. That sounds exciting, but it sucks. It fucking sucks so bad. But let's anyway, I'm gonna breathe. Honestly, the only reason I took a second glance at Hammer of the Witches was because of the fucking fantastic artwork, which is more inspiration in one oil-painted tit than the last decade's worth of Cradle cover sleeves combined. One of the issues with Cradle of Filth is the constantly rotating staff, right, orbiting frontman Daniel Filth, as we have established greatly by this far into the video. The stars have aligned here in quite an interesting fashion, though. Drumming powerhouse Martin Skorupka, he's still here, man. He's still breathing untold life into these songs, even if he played on a couple of stinkers. It's kind of similar. He's like fucking lighting a fire underneath it, kind of like how Adrian Lanson lit fires beneath the frosted rifts of Midian all those moons ago. So, with the long-running songwriter / guitarist mastermind / awful gobstopper dodger Paul Allender leaving the fold for the second time, room for fresh new stringsmen has opened up, and that brings in some new blood, which is so fucking needed at this point. You got Marek Ashok Smerda. Again, sorry if I fucked your name up, pal. I can't. I'm useless with this shit. Richard Shaw as well on guitar, and Daniel Firth on bass. Whole new string section, and of course on harp and fucking keyboards is the legendary Lindsay Schoolcraft. So this is basically a whole new fucking band, and you can really tell this is so fresh. This is fucking so good. I could waffle for some time, but the song Deflower in the Maidenhead, Displeasure in the Goddess, what a title, and the thrash tackler Blackest Magic in Practice show Cradle of Filth in an impressive display of pregnancy after years of barren creative stagnation. My eyes and ears once again opened. I find myself praying that Cradle of Filth continue in this vein. Oh, and they, to be fair, they kind of did. And this is a monstrous album. What a comeback. What a welcome back to a band that had been floundering for quite some time. But before we talk about even more new Cradle of Filth albums with this lovely refreshed lineup, do you remember right at the start of the video I told you that Cradle of Filth's second album, Dusk And Her Embrace, was lost, as in it was like kept in the lock and key. Something went tits up with Cacophonous, and that album got lost along the way. Eventually, Dusk and Her Embrace obviously came out a few years later, but the original version was lost. Until now, 21 years later, and this is something I thought I would never, ever end up hearing. This was one of the, for me, and I'm sure for the band, and I'm sure for a lot of fans, it was one of the painful parts of the early Cradle of Filth lore, a massive casualty of the ever-shifting lineups and legal battles. Personally, in my mind, probably due to always being disillusioned by the production styles on Dusk and Cruelty and the Beast, I concocted the thought that this original shelved version of Dusk would be like some sort of extended session of the Vempire recordings. I figured as they offered Vempire up to contractually fulfill the obligations that they had with Cacophonous at the time, that those songs offered so hastily were maybe from the same sessions as the cancelled Dusk album. Crazy how that last-minute half-assed release, again, Vempire, is now one of their best. So I thought maybe the rest of it was sitting out there somewhere on a shelf just waiting. Imagine the production and fucking intensity of Vempire, but with Dusk and Her Embrace songs. I wasn't entirely right in my assumption. The production here is a lot rawer and is easily the most noticeable difference. The original recording of Dusk and Her Embrace lends a lot more to the sound of Principle of Evil Made Flesh, only a lot faster, and done anything that it would become on the later re-recorded version that came out in 96. So the second thing that's most different here in this, unreleased version is the vocals. They're a lot less affected, I guess. They sit more towards the black metal style that kind of Danny had on the Principle of Evil Made Flesh, rather than the super high-pitched squawks that would become Danny's trademark. I'm not sure what kind of devilish pact the band have entered into with Cacophonous, because those two apparently fucking hate each other to death. So how this finally got released, I don't really know. But, the fact it's kind of 20 years after the original Dusk can't be a coincidence. I'm super stoked this finally got released. And although this release will never offer nothing new to more recent fans of the band, or most fans of the band at this point, it is the most interesting and valuable cash-in release the band have done. I just talked to you about some of them and they're fucking dreadful. This was absolutely outstanding. And to be fair, at this point, with Cradle of Filth's success, this is now a piece of metal history, and its release into the world for monetary gain or no can only be a good thing in the long run, although it does destroy some of the mystery of the early Cradle lore about those lost albums. It is an absolute pleasure to listen to this and finally have it out in the world. Anyway, put a line under that. Let's listen to some more new Cradle of Filth stuff. So here's where I deviate from the narrative a bit, and basically it's parroted by Cradle fans around the world that this period, with a consistent lineup of the new blood of Ashok and Richard and Daniel Firth and Lindsay Schoolcraft and Martin Skripka, Danning Filth, that is like the pinnacle Cradle solid lineup. And that kind of, opinion that they never released anything bad, I can't get on board with that. At this point in 2017, when Cryptoriana came out, Cradle really seemed to be firing out albums and releases. The remaster of fucking Cruelty and the Beast not long after this, I don't think. I'm losing track of time. I'm getting old maybe, and time is sailing by with the pace of, say, a methamphetamine-powered Concorde. But anyway, Cryptoriana stylistically is not dissimilar to the excellent Hammer of the Witches. It's nimble and well produced, and the band is still enjoying, as I say, its most reliable and consistently strong lineup in quite some time. However, I cannot shake the feeling that they're just going through the motions here again. Just like how Darkly Aversa followed up from the excellent Godspeed on the Devil's Thunder, Cryptoriana, the Seductiveness of Decay, follows up the Hammer of the Witches in a similar style, when it's just like, okay, we're on a good streak, now we got to pump an album out, and it's just not very good. So aside from some something style guitar playing on some more relaxed passages, this is excruciating Cradle by numbers. And don't get me wrong, this isn't boring. like Manticore or Venus Aversa, and whilst the songs here are incredibly musically dexterous, there's just nothing challenging, nothing new, and perhaps most importantly, nothing really exciting about any of the songs here. Which, I gotta be honest, at this point, is pretty disappointing. But there we go. Cryptoriana. Oh boy, tell you all right. Talk about keeping you on your toes, right? This has been a long video, and this band, my god, that word meandering comes up again. Like, they are all over the fucking shop. So that consistent lineup, 4 years later from Cryptoriana, this consistent lineup is still around on the one, the only Existence is Futile. The only difference here is that Lindsay Schoolcraft decided to leave, which is a crying shame because Lindsay Schoolcraft, you know, she's fucking great, to be honest with you. And, you know, we got a new female vocalist / keyboardist called Annabelle, who is now in the group. And boom, out of nowhere, just before Halloween, in 2021, this year, Cradle of Filth dropped an Existence is Futile, their fuck knows how many album. This is literally Cradle back at top form. Again, this is such a fucking solid, fucking just absolutely savage album. Just look at that art. Look at that art. That's something like Hieronymus Bosch, kind of even early Cathedral. Who did the early Cathedral stuff? I can't remember off the top of my head. But it's got that vibe to it, and it's just carnage. And it really fucking hits home that Cradle are just going to fuck you up. And they fucking do. This is some serious metal right here. There's some amazing tracks here. Absolutely amazing. Necromantic Fantasies, Crawling King Chaos, both that were released, you know, before the album came out. And, you know, just as like downloads or, you know, singles, really, really got the hype going for this. The artwork, again, is absolutely incredible. Songs on this, you know, what's the song? One about the dying of the embers, a discourse between a man and his soul. Oh my God, what a song. Black Smoke Curling from the Lips of War. Honestly, this is a solid fucking comeback album. The closer, Us Stark Invincible, is more like the Cradle that we're used to. A kind of mid-paced gothic kind of stuff with a like pumping kind of chorus. But, you know, this sounds different from the other stuff. And even though it's on yet another label in the form of Nuclear Blast, it was also produced by Scott Atkins, who produced a few of the band's albums at this rate. And really, it is such a return to form at this point in a band that's like 30 years into like this, as you can tell by this video, an absolutely insanely fucking, you know, what a meandering, bizarre, outright unusual career. And honestly, even though this video is probably going to hit about an hour's in length, I don't even know where Cradle of Filth are going to go at this point. If they keep pumping out albums like Existence is Futile kind of level of quality, then, you know, I'm going to be remaining a full-time fan for quite some time. But honestly, no matter what this band put out at this point, I'm going to be checking out. There were times, maybe 10 years or so ago, when I completely fell out of love with Cradle of Filth, as you could probably tell from the way I spoke about those records in this video. But look, at this point, whatever they throw at me, I'm going to listen to it, like it or love it. I mean, there's a 50% chance easily at this point what I'm going to, you know, hear is not going to really suit my tastes. But damn, I mean, there isn't a band really that is as inconsistent as Cradle of Filth. You know, they're all over the shop. And I guess that's part of the allure to them. But anyway, thank you so much for sticking with me. If you have gone all the way through this video with me. It's been a hell of a journey coming through this entire Cradle of Filth discography. In fact, I've even left stuff out, like I said. It's fucking so much. You know, we've done EPs and we've done studio albums. Oh my God, I could go all day. There's so much more we could talk about. Well, we're going to knock it on the head. Thank you if you've made it this far. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed and maybe you learned something from this, or maybe it's inspired you to check out some of these, some of these albums. So if you've got anything to say, of course, just drop a comment, positive, negative, anything, just fucking say it. If you've got something to say, just drop it down below and let's start a dialogue on this. Thanks so much for watching. I hope I will get back in the new year or in 2020 with some more. I don't want to make any promises, but I'm hoping I'll do some more discographies in that time. So thanks so much again. Thank you for watching. I'll let Cradle play us out. Take it easy. Ta-da now.